Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. I'd want to share two remarkable near-death experiences with you. My first NDE was upsetting. This is the most uncommon sort of NDE, according to research findings from the International Association for Near-Death Studies, or IANDS. Most troubled experiencers are hesitant to discuss the existence of evil, are unhappy, divorced from their spouse, and have other social issues. The first NDEs can be fun, relaxing, or unpleasant. In my experience, I was given the opportunity to view, feel, and comprehend life from a variety of perspectives. The rite of passage into God's kingdom is granted to all beings. On July 2, 2000, about 12:30 p.m., I had my first accident. I was up on a ladder painting our house's chimney when I fell 28 feet and banged my head on a landscape timber. On impact, I should have broken my neck and perished. My wife and son were present when I fell. As I typed this, tears welled up in my eyes as I imagined how shocked my wife and son must have been to see me fall to the ground. They heard the crunching sound of my injuries and witnessed a never-ending torrent of blood pouring from my head. They didn't know whether I was dead or alive at the time. God's Spirit prevented me from experiencing such excruciating suffering. When I arrived at the hospital about 1:30 p.m., I was immediately rushed to the trauma center. The doctors in the emergency room detected my critical injuries and stopped the bleeding. They discovered that I had damaged the entire left side of my face, which meant that the bone structure above and below my eye had been crushed and would require reconstructive surgery. My eye was being forced back into my skull. The fall's impact fractured both wrists. Following their initial evaluation, the doctors determined that my traumatic brain injury was severe due to brain swelling, so they opted to postpone any operation until they could identify whether my frontal lobe was swelling internally or externally. When I was given my final rites, the nurses looked after my wife. God had physical and spiritual influence over me, showing a spiritual world that exists in the cosmos. This terrifying NDE was more evil than my combat infantryman service in Vietnam, where I observed the atrocities of war and the manifestation of evil on a people and their leaders. I can't tell you the order of events as they transpired as I traveled, but they were true. Spirits were attacking me and attempting to enter my soul. Then I saw what appeared to be endless oceans of souls under an evil reign. Hundreds of millions of people lost loved ones. I could feel their terror, pain, and torture. The crying and pain they were directing at me were excruciating. They were relentless, and I could only scream. But then, the Holy Spirit protected me from these acts of violence. I couldn't stop crying when I first told my wife and children. My human nature and free will were pushed to the forefront at some time throughout this spiritual journey, and I felt the immoral deeds that I had committed in my life. I've done things I'm not proud of, while yet enjoying life's joys. During our spiritual transformation, evil confuses and deceives us by utilizing our characteristics, revenge, avarice, sexual cravings, fixation with power, and so on, against us. These traits strike me as warnings to God's creation. In my near-death experience, I had to choose between the realistic temptations of evil and God's love. I chose the love of God. I crawled, feeling as though I were fighting a spiritual force to complete my rite of passage. God's loving light guided me. I passed past a spiritual or cosmic dialectic barrier. I know it's true. Without God's love, we may find ourselves on the wrong side of history. Our prayers assist people who've been duped by wickedness. Then I saw the entrance into heaven and stood in front of God. I was completely enveloped in this wonderful love and tranquility. I've never felt such light in my life, and I can't wait to return. Before I awoke, I received my first message. Take care of your family. This has been a highly personal experience for me, and I'm highly honored to be a messenger to you, my extended family. Despite the critical conditions, the healthcare personnel treated me nicely while I was in the hospital. 3 days later, I awoke from my coma. My wife claimed I awoke with a kind, loving, and patient soul. After I recovered, I told my wife and family about my ordeal. Their affection and open-mindedness aided my recovery, which is advice for anyone caring for someone who has recently experienced a near-death experience. I didn't tell anyone about my NDE because I was humbled and overwhelmed by God's love. I still have flaws. Just because I survived doesn't mean that evil is no longer present. In the years since, I've come to appreciate the power of prayer. I recognize that the absolute love of our Supreme God is more strong than evil's deceptions. My second near-death experience. My second near-death experience was not like the first. On February 23, 2012, I underwent what would have been outpatient surgery for sleep apnea at an Oregon hospital. Septoplasty, inferior turbinoplasty, and uvulopalatopharyngoplasty were all performed on me. According to my wife, the anesthesiologist did not correctly dose my procedure. Because I had negative pressure pulmonary edema, both of my lungs were filled with blood and fluids. Almost at the same time, I developed acute respiratory distress, causing my throat airway to swell and constrict. I spent 3 days in the intensive care unit, but I made it. The nurses encouraged my wife throughout my rehabilitation, and the staff responded admirably. While I was recovering, I apologized to my wife for returning. My rehabilitation was difficult and bittersweet because my surgery was a painful failure. I have no recollection of a spiritual journey, simply of being delivered a message. I was humbled once more by another great message to share with God's creation. It is more crucial than my return. God is eternal. He is the creator of supreme being. His unconditional love for all of his creation is eternal. His gifts to us are spirituality, consciousness, and free will. Evil grows stronger. I absolutely understand that God is greater than our world. I discovered IANDS while trying to make sense of my NDEs. This expert group has done some excellent research into unpleasant NDEs and the spiritual afterlife. Their studies helped me learn more about the survival of awareness. My 43-year-old wife asked that I obtain a neuropsych evaluation to prove that I'm in good mental health. My doctor's diagnosis for a senior citizen over the age of 67 ranges from mild cognitive impairment to very early dementia. I am in good health. I am only here because God loves all of his creation. I pray we have the fortitude to separate fact from fiction, to trust God, and to be driven to serve one another. I recognize that life isn't fair, so I make the best of it by sharing my experience. After effects. After authorizing papers for IANDS International Conference themes and publishing my 2 near-death experiences on the website of the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, I ask for your consideration of my after effects. As references and encouragement, I used Nancy Evans Bush's novels Dancing Past the Dark and The Buddha in Hell. She was the executive director of IANDS and later its president, as well as a member of its board of directors. She is regarded as a world authority on distressing NDEs. I'm here to confirm her conclusion that God's love exists in both the spiritual afterlife and hell or evil. I was struck by Bruce Grayson, MD's remarks in the forward section of Dancing Past the Dark, which stated, "Reality is both less and more than we imagine it is." Bush reminds us that spiritual encounters with darkness, as well as light, difficulty, and suffering, are described as means to transformation in every enduring religion tradition. These adventures may be terrifying, difficult, and torturous, But they are trials, not punishments, and they may result in priceless spiritual treasures. They may not be the gifts we expected, but they never diminish us. While reading, I realized that other NDE survivors have unexpected gifts for healing, talents, acquired knowledge, psychic empathy, sensitivity to electricity, and no fear of death. Materialism, the media, and the spiritual force of evil, I believe, are negatively overpowering our senses, influencing our lifestyle choices, and influencing our conscious willpower to differentiate right from wrong. I agree with Alice R. Turner, author of The History of Hell, when she says that it suggests a need for change in the person's life and or a reassessment of what really matters, not power, not money, but love, wisdom, and service. I have been spiritually reborn as a result of my life's journey. It is a privilege to serve our Supreme God, the Creator of all things. My first NDE was upsetting. I became aware of the spiritual force of evil and falsehood. Since my NDEs, it has been difficult to balance the life after surviving a war with current events such as the pandemic, economic recession, and societal discontent. As these events develop with so many unknowns, the significance of God's first instruction, take care of your family, becomes clear. My second near-death experience was not like the first. However, I received another amazing revelation underlining that God is eternal. He is the Creator's supreme being. His unconditional love for all of His creation is eternal. His gifts to us are spirituality, consciousness, and free will. Evil keeps spreading. As we go through life, I pray we have the fortitude to recognize the truth in the midst of adversity. I recognize that our human existence exposes us to other people's insensitivity and significant disparities in living levels around the world. Current events are having unanticipated consequences on our people. The forces at work are beyond our intellectual and spiritual comprehension. Evil deceives and shocks us by exploiting our human characteristics, such as vengeance, greed, sexual cravings, and a longing for power, to ensnare us during our spiritual transition from our physical world at death. This wicked force is invisible, like a virus. Hell, on the other hand, has been around for unknown millennia. I hope mankind recognizes Alice R. Turner's statements as suggesting a need for change in the person's life and or reevaluation of what really matters, not power, not money, but love, knowledge, and service. My prayer since beginning my aerospace and energy profession has always been to glorify God in the work that I do. Working as part of the Strategic Assessment Group on the Orion spacecraft at NASA's Houston headquarters was a dream come true. Later in my life, the opportunity resulted in unforeseen life-changing decisions. This realization reinforced my opinion that God is bigger than our world. Throughout my trip, I've realized that God's absolute and eternal love is more powerful than evil's deceptions and materialism's rising strength. The interpretation of my NDE lessons and spiritual awareness, I hope, will improve your feeling of meaning and purpose for yourself and others. I am aware that mankind continues to exist in various socioeconomic realities and has various conceptions of spirituality. Nonetheless, I pray that our free will makes the right choices and that we continue to sense God's guidance and love.